A number of people have asked me the exact same question this week, and that is, Neil, is China planning a crippling retaliation on the United States? And I want to thank Gary Stacey from my Patreon community for asking me to look at the correlation between what happened with, again, the USA between World War I and World War II with China, and how that sort of cross-references to what we're seeing today, just with a different superpower, but in the same region. So I want to start by challenging your thinking here for a moment. So let's go back to around about the period of 1930, where, interestingly enough, way before Pearl Harbor actually took place, there was the Empire of Japan and, of course, the US conflict, where both countries prepared for war for a long time, let's just say that. Because what happened, the US forces, the expansion in the region was always a threat to Japan. In fact, we could go right back to the 1890s in the Pacific region, which again led up to a lot of the confrontations that ensued. But I really want to touch upon the key point, the straw that broke the camel's back. And that was that Japan back then was a major industrial military power, just a huge empire. But what did they rely on? They relied on oil. So what did the US do? Well, they put a strangulation on the oil supply, what was known as an oil embargo, which to the Empire of Japan was really the last straw, because there was nothing really further they could do, except, in their mind, of course, except for military action. So that's one of the things that led up to the events that we saw with Pearl Harbor and other catalysts in that time, where it was that initial strike to disable the US naval fleet in the region. Now, I'm not bringing this correlation because I think that China is in the same position today and that they're going to do this to the United States. That's not it at all. But I think it's key that we do go over some of these points, because I made a list of 7 things that China could do in retaliation to the United States tariffs, and also what the US is doing with semiconductors and advanced tech, but also this proposal, shall we call it, to cut the Chinese companies out of the US stock market. Now, that could be one of the last straws for the camel. But before we go over these 7 points then, I want to play you a quick video that I made yesterday when the sun was shining. Funny enough, it's not today, so check this out. I'm really excited today because I want to invite you to a very special event here at my castle home on the beautiful Isle of Man. In fact, just look in here. This is a boiler from the Victorian era. I honestly wondered some days if I'd be able to get all the structural work done in time before the entire thing fell down. And I'm not joking when I say that, but as you can see behind in the distance there, the structural work has been done now. So at least it's on its way to becoming a beautiful historical home that will last for another 200 years after we've all gone. And I think that's really the point. Life is about experiences. We can't take the money with us. And that's why I want to invite you here to the castle to spend a day with me and just experience all of this beauty. We'll walk the grounds like I'm doing now. There's a lot to walk around. We'll take a tour of the house and I'll show you the historic features that we are restoring. I mean, some of this stuff, cornicing, 100-year-old cornicing and wood paneling and all the things that we are actively working on a day-by-day basis to save, because I think it's important that we do save properties like this, historic homes. I think it's important that they don't just dilapidate and fall apart. But we'll also take a nice relaxing walk or walks, probably a lot of walks. Unless you can't walk, then we won't walk, we'll simply sit. We'll walk around the grounds, we'll just catch up, we can chat about anything you want, whether it's finance, geopolitics, whether it's just general chit-chat, whether you want my guidance on something. we'll have amazing food and drinks for the day, and we'll basically just live the dream for a day. All with breathtaking views across the valley here, of course. You'll get to see my studio, all of my equipment, my setup. I'll show you how I make my videos and my live streams and my walk and talks. I'll show you pretty much everything. In the evening, we'll share a meal together that you will never forget, because this is a historic Victorian steam train dining experience where we travel from one side of the island to the other whilst enjoying a multiple course meal. And believe me, it is something that you never forget. I just finished trimming the apple trees a few weeks ago, and I'm glad I did, because they've all started to bud now. So we'll have some beautiful juicy red apples from the orchard shortly. So here's how you can come and spend the day at the castle here then. It's very simple to enter this raffle. All you need to do is buy a ticket on the raffle page for as little as just £1, which is less than $1 or less than €1. But of course, the more tickets you buy, the more bonus tickets you get, and the better your odds of winning. Oh, and did I mention I'm going to pay for all of your transport? Yes, from your front door here and back again. So that means your flights and your accommodation here for 2 nights on the island. I'll pay for your hotel accommodation as well. So if this sounds like something you'd love to experience, just buy your raffle ticket now, and I look forward to seeing the lucky winner here on the beautiful Isle of Man. I wish you all the luck in the world. Best of luck. And as always then, the link for that to enter the competition is below in the description. Okay, let's go on to these 7 points now then. I've got a good few pages here of notes that have helped me to really formulate my thoughts around this. So I want to start with the crucial one, I believe, which would be cyber warfare. Because you've got to think China possesses a very highly advanced capabilities around cyber warfare. They've been developing these for a number of years. We've seen a number of tests as well. And what could be the worst thing they could possibly do? Well, there's 2 things that, very interestingly, you'll see how these connect with the dots as we go through. One of them could be an attack on the US infrastructure, if we get to that point of not yet conventional warfare, but somewhere in between, something like a cyber warfare. What would that do? It would be the same, the US would treat that as the same as a conventional attack, I believe. But I really think the biggest risk is not an attack on infrastructure, which keeps being talked about all the time, but I believe an attack on the US financial system is a lot more likely. And if we don't see that, we could even see a red flag that someone says is China. It could be another actor in the world that says it was China, and they even do it in such an intelligent, advanced way that it makes it even look as though the evidence leads to China. This is another thing. If we saw a critical attack on the US financial system at the same time as some of these other things I'm going to talk about, this could be really serious. Now, the second point then is something I've mentioned. I think I even mentioned it last week, actually. And this is something that China's already doing, but in smaller proportions at the moment. And this is the dumping of US treasuries, or T-bills. Because just a reminder, China holds around $800 billion worth of US treasuries. Now, if it does start to dump these treasuries, it will do 2 things. Number 1, it will harm China as well. But number 2, it will harm the US more, because as they dump treasuries, this would cause interest rates to spike. It would also destabilize markets and hit the confidence of investors in a very negative way. So I think this situation or scenario would only be used in an absolute worst case scenario, or where China felt that it would benefit them a lot more than it would benefit the USA. Number 3 then is already taking place right now, but this is de-dollarization, but we're going to call this point accelerated de-dollarization. Why? Simply because this is taking place at the moment, and they are already accelerating these plans. They're putting them really on a speed boost at the moment. They're really pushing, and there's meetings going on almost daily to help with the de-dollarization plans. What you really need to know is that we are moving to a new monetary system Who's going to control that system? I'm still on the fence with, but there'll definitely be a very powerful monetary system which is heavily influenced by the BRICS nations, which isn't just Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa anymore. Of course, there's a lot more countries that have signed up for this, even some countries that we would have never seen several years ago. Number 4 then is interesting because it was only a couple of weeks ago, and then last week again, that I talked about one thing China could do in retaliation to US tariffs or the trade war. And that was we looked at how much rare earth minerals China controls. And I said one strategy they could do is to just ban the export of this and really reduce that supply down, which would hurt the US immensely. China controls over 90, sometimes 95% of the world's supply of some of these rare earth minerals, which are absolutely crucially important for all sorts of the tech sector, but not just the tech sector, but advanced military capabilities in the United States as well. And honestly, countries have gone to war for less than this. Number 5 then is the seizure of US companies or US company assets in China as a direct retaliation. Now, although this one might seem a little far-fetched, we actually have seen cases like this before. In fact, it's not the same example, but just look what happened with the self-sanctions on Western companies that pulled out of Russia when the conflict started. And if you recall what happened to the stock price of some of these companies that took those actions, can you imagine what would happen to these US companies if that actually occurred in China? Investor confidence would be knocked heavily. You would see more companies, more retail investors starting to look towards bonds, especially with these spiking yields as well. So this could hit the market in a destabilizing way at the same time as we see some of these other events unfolding. In fact, before I get to the other points, to summarize some of this, you could actually see China, if they really wanted to, doing all of these points as a coordinated attack all at the same time. And I don't think there would be much that the US or any other country could do to stop that if they did decide to enact that plan. Now, number 6 is really interesting because as I was thinking through this morning and formulating my thoughts, we actually had some news break about this exact thing. So I'll come on to that in a moment after we've covered 6 and 7, but this is quite crucial. So point number 6 then is a strategic alliance with US adversaries. So these could be seen as Russia, North Korea, Iran, and other smaller factions. This could be done as a tactic to really stretch thin the US influence in certain regions, because if the US has to deal with multiple fronts, and I don't mean from a conventional military point of view, but multiple fronts, this could also lead to a lot of chaos. What could they do? Well, they could look at energy policy. They could do intelligence sharing. There could be military drills that are conducted together, similar to what we saw last year. Number 7 then is increased tension around Taiwan. And this doesn't even mean what some analysts call full-scale invasion of Taiwan. It doesn't even need to be that. It could be military exercises. It could be blockades. It could be something to do with energy infrastructure or affecting the semiconductor industry. It could be those cyber attacks or directly trying to influence the government or weaken the government there. Of course, any of these things would have an impact on the United States as well, especially with the semiconductor industry. This would hit US markets and supply chains at a time when the supply chains are already stretched really, really hard right now due to this economic or this tariff or the trade warfare that we are seeing. And of course, all of these things would have an impact, but if they were all done together, this would be somewhat catastrophic for the United States, and China wouldn't have had to fire even a single bullet. Now, I mentioned a point around number 6, I tell you now. This was news that just came out earlier. I'm going to read this out to you. It says, the United States has just confirmed that Chinese satellite firms are supporting Houthi attacks on US warships. They go on to say that they warn China to be careful because this could be seen as a direct declaration of war if they continue to assist the enemy of the United States. So they go on to say that the company is aiding Iran-backed militants by providing satellite imagery used in attacks on US warships and commercial vessels in the Red Sea. And of course, this is how it starts, you see. It starts with small things like this, and of course going in the news over and over again, that eventually people will get somewhat fed up of all of these things, and they would eventually say, right, we need to do something about X country, whichever country it is, China in this case. And this is how sometimes you do get to conventional warfare, which of course we want to avoid. But I actually think the biggest risk for conventional warfare at the moment is not really what I've covered here. It's something somewhat different in scope entirely, and that would be the very high debt levels that exist in most of our Western economies, where we can't even service the debt. I mean, you think about the US, just to service the debt now this year is $1 trillion. It's unsustainable. And if you think Doge is going to solve that, I've done the numbers, I've looked at the models, I just can't see it happening. The debt levels are still going up by $50,000 roughly per second. And I think this is what will actually cause war in the future. It will be a debt spiral as a result of countries just not being able to get that GDP anymore, having too much debt to service, overtaxing the citizens, causing the richest citizens, entrepreneurs and business owners to flee the country to other countries where they're treated a lot better and the tax levels are lower. And it's just a vicious cycle that never ends. And of course, nobody ever wants war unless they make a profit from the war, which some people do, of course. But normal citizens like you and like me, we don't want warfare. We want peace, we want stability, we just want a good life for ourselves and our families. But when countries do feel threatened, and I'm saying this both ways actually, I think the US feels threatened by the sheer advancement of China and how they are, you've seen the videos on social media, they are advancing at a rapid rate, and not just economically, but their military as well. And the technology is somewhat phenomenal of the things they are inventing. But at the same time, China feels threatened by the US. The US at any time could cut them off from advanced technology and some of the things that they need. They could cut them off from the SWIFT system, like what happened to Russia. And of course, China owns huge amounts of US debt. And there's a number of other things that we could even see from the US tactics, such as no longer paying out on US debt abroad. It might seem extreme what I just said, but that is something we could even see as a tactic in the near future. And just remember what I've been telling you here for a long, long time. We're probably going back 5 years. Yes, the US has the world reserve currency at the moment, but there will come a time when it's no longer the reserve currency. This is what's meant by de-dollarization. When that happens, all of those dollars that live outside of the United States, all around the world, will flood back to the United States at one point or another. And we saw what happened when the dollar increases without value and services and other things increasing. We saw this during the lockdowns and the currency creation of 2020. So really take a lesson, it's not a long history lesson there, but it's a very short history lesson of what happened then. This is why I always say you've got to prepare for all of these things. And lastly, don't forget about the prize draw that I am running. Just click the link below in the description or the pinned comment. I'm really looking forward to meeting one of you here on the beautiful Isle of Man. Thank you so much for subscribing here and sharing this video with anyone that you feel needs to watch it. Thanks a lot. Take care. God bless.